I will fill in some gaps now, talking about some of the games that we didn't get to here this week from a college football standpoint. Again, obviously a lot of stuff going on there with college basketball, the NBA, the NHL, to go along with college football and the NFL. So got some gaps to fill in here for you today on the rest of the show. Go ahead and do that now to finish things off for this Thursday edition of the program. We start with Memphis and South Florida, game 119-120 here. Memphis, a 14.5-point favorite. And we talked about it a little bit in that Temple and Cincinnati breakdown with Brad Powers in the previous segment, that's a big game next week between Memphis and Cincinnati. It's going to mean more for the Memphis side because they're in more of a division race there in the West. Cincinnati should have the East completely locked up, which would mean that those two teams would play each other again the following week in the conference championship game. So that would make that line very, very interesting. But for right now, Memphis and South Florida, look, South Florida is terrible offensively, but their defense has played pretty well over the course of the year here. And that is, of course, the calling card for head coach Charlie Strong, where he had some very good defenses there with Louisville. South Florida on the year tied for 33rd in yards per play against with 5.14. And in fact, in conference play, 5.4 yards per play allowed, which in the AAC with some of the high octane offenses that are in that conference, that's not that bad. My line on this game is South Florida plus 11.5. So a little bit of value on the Bulls. The problem here is that you are asking a lot of that South Florida defense because this South Florida offense is terrible. Memphis, 7th in the country in yards per play. South Florida, nowhere near that. They are 93rd in the country in yards per play. So you can see why this is a 2-touchdown line on the road. Again, you're asking South Florida's defense to slow down a very, very good Memphis offense. I don't know to what degree they can do that, and South Florida's offense is not going to be able to go score for score with Memphis. So even though I've got a little bit of a power ratings overlay here, Memphis lines have been inflated over the course of the season because they're kind of in the driver's seat for that group of 5 New Year's 6 bowl berth. So you've got to pay a premium in every Memphis game. That's the case here again this week. I'm not interested in either side of this game, but just to give you kind of a breakdown of the handicap, South Florida's defense has the potential to play okay, but their offense will have a tough time keeping up with the Memphis offense. So if you think that South Florida can hold the Memphis offense down a little bit, maybe the under 60 the way that you go here in this game. But again, for me, I'll believe it when I see it if South Florida can slow down that very good Memphis offense. Duke and Wake Forest. Wake Forest, a 7-point favorite with some extra juice here in this one. And look, when you get a game with Wake Forest and they're taking money, that's a pretty good indicator for you that they are the sharp side and quite possibly the right side in this game. Duke has not played well at all in the second half of the season. They're turning the football over way too much. The defense just hasn't really been good enough. This is a spot where it's Wake Forest or nothing, at least according to what the market is saying. My line was 6.5 where it opened. But I think that there is some value on the Wake Forest side here because Duke is not playing well at all. They turn the football over. And the one thing we know about Wake Forest, their defense has not played well this season, but their offense has. And if you're going to give them extra possessions, like Duke has done in so many of its games here so far this season, you got to look Wake Forest here. So like the 7 at a decent juice, minus 115, the way you look here in this one. And in fact, Wake Forest may end up on my card here. I should have gotten it at 6.5. Probably should have expected it to go up a little bit as well. But Wake Forest would be the only side I could take there in that North Carolina battle. BYU and UMass, game 133-134. BYU up to a 40.5-point favorite at the peak out there in the market. Most places 39.5 on this one. BYU getting Zach Wilson back should help their offense be a little bit more efficient. UMass played pretty well against Northwestern, only outgained by 100 yards, but they didn't turn the football over. But man, they're such a bad team, and getting 39.5 or 40 here, if you had a BYU team that was worried about something else, like a division, like a conference, something like that, maybe you could make more of a case for UMass, but I don't know if I can take either side here in this game. At least I've got this one power rated accurately enough. My line on this one, BYU minus 41.5. So maybe a little bit higher than the market, but not a game I will have any interest in at all whatsoever. Troy and Louisiana is a game I may have some interest in here. My line is 12 on this game. And, Troy, over the last couple of weeks, looks so much better than they had previously. Louisiana runs the football very, very well, but I've kind of been disappointed with Louisiana Lafayette here so far in conference play. They've got the record. They should wind up making it to the conference title game here, probably get another crack at Appalachian State, but they haven't been really as dominant as I expected them to. They had a nice win over Arkansas State, but last week, South Alabama covered the number easily against them. They had the blowout win over Coastal Carolina, but Coastal Carolina was probably due for one of those games where they just got badly outplayed, couldn't get off the field on third down. Louisiana went 9 for 11 on third down in that game. But, the Raging Cajuns just, something doesn't seem as dominant as it should about that team. Troy, still a very good team. They're trying to get bowl eligible. They play Appalachian State next week, so a very tough game for them. I think Troy keeps this one close. I think the inflated prices from earlier in the season with Louisiana have carried over here to the month of November. I think this line's a little bit too high. Again, my number is 12. This one's up from 13.5 to 14. I think Troy is the side here. And if they get blown out, it is what it is. But I think Troy offensively is kind of finding a groove a little bit. They've gotten better. They're top 30 in the country now in yards per play on offense. Chip Lindsey's starting to settle in a little bit here. And also, they've got 7.2 yards per play in the month of November. So they're getting better. They're improving. Whereas I think maybe a team like Louisiana has plateaued a little bit as the season's gone along. So I do like Troy plus the 14. You don't have to jump on this one quickly. Maybe we get a rogue 14.5, something like that. But I think that's a game that's definitely on my radar here for this weekend. Again, not in a hurry to make that play, but a game that I will have on my short list going into the weekend. Game 141, 142, Liberty and Virginia, one that Brad Powers mentioned a little bit in our first segment. Virginia in a bad spot here. They play that rivalry game against Virginia Tech next week. There are some division outcomes on the line here for that one in the Coastal Division. So maybe not a game that Virginia is completely focused on here against Liberty. Liberty, with Hugh Freeze, the offense has gotten better as the season's gone along. You can understand this line move and where it's coming from. My line was 18.5, so right there on the opener. I'm not going to play this game. But again, the thought process here being that Virginia has so much bigger of a game on deck, possibly a chance at the ACC title game. If Virginia Tech beats Pitt this week, those two teams will be 5-2. That's your Coastal Division championship game. So Virginia, maybe not a whole lot of incentive to go out there and play too tough against Liberty. That game doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things at all whatsoever. And you will get some of those instances here in week 13 of the college football season. So that's one, and week 14 as well. That's one where, you can see why the line move coming in on Liberty. Again, I don't know if I want to trust Liberty in that spot, but don't be surprised if you don't get a max effort from the Virginia Cavaliers in that one. We jump down to game 149, 150 here. Minnesota and Northwestern. Minnesota opened a 12.5-point favorite, 13.5 market wide. Bovada the first to go to 14, which obviously suggests that public money very, very heavily on Minnesota here. But it does appear that maybe a little bit of sharp money, if it's out there, also on the Golden Gophers for this one. And my line on this game is 13, so I'm right there in line with the market. But you really have to wonder for Northwestern here, how invested is this football team? They've got the rivalry game against Illinois coming up. They would certainly like to get that one. But I think they go into this game knowing they're probably not going to beat Minnesota. Now, obviously, you've got the consideration here of a very low total of 39, down from 40.5, but Minnesota still going up from 12.5 to 13.5 and even on to 14. So you've got a total coming down, a favorite going up. We've seen that a lot here in college football so far this season. And I agree with this line move. I think Minnesota, they were the better team against Iowa in the box score last week. Didn't come away with the victory. I think this is a get right, let out some frustration type of game before the big matchup against Wisconsin coming up here next week. I think Minnesota wants to stay sharp. I think PJ Fleck is the right kind of motivator to get his team off the mat early in the week, get them mobilized to go on the short trip to Evanston and blow out a team that by all accounts they should blow out. So I think Minnesota is the side there in that one. Utah and Arizona, another one here where you've got a Pac-12 favorite going up. A lot of these games here this week, that is the case here with Utah and Arizona. Arizona, they're kind of going back and forth between Khalil Tate and Grant Gunnell. Kevin Sumlin just seems to have no idea what he's doing with that program. They fired the DC earlier on in the year. And Utah, again, I've talked about this before when I've broken down their games. Since that loss to USC, and that was a coin flip type of game, they have done no wrong. I mean, they're blowing teams out. They played a close game against Washington, but other than that, they've blown out a lot of inferior competition. Arizona definitely qualifies as inferior competition here. So with this number going up from 21 to 22.5, got a pretty strong indicator that sharp money on Utah once again here this week. And who are we to argue with what they've done here over the course of the season? South Alabama and Georgia State, game 155-156. Last week we were on South Alabama in the Gold Nugget. It was my biggest overlay of the week. I had a 9-point overlay in that game against Louisiana, and South Alabama covered with ease. They were really never out of that game. This is what they do. This is what South Alabama does. They play a lot of these games where their box score, their stats aren't particularly impressive, but they hang around. I would expect the same thing here this week against Georgia State. And Georgia State, if Dan Ellington plays, I haven't seen anything to the contrary as of yet this week, Dan Ellington is playing on a torn ACL. He played last week, was not particularly effective in that game. They got blown out badly by Appalachian State. I think that you've got a situation here where Georgia State is just not the same team. Ellington may play, but obviously with a torn ACL, he's at 70 or 75%, something like that. South Alabama has a knack for keeping games close. For whatever reason, they're just able to do it. And last week, we saw Georgia State. They did wind up putting up 27 points, but we saw Georgia State, when that was still a game, really struggle badly on the offensive end of things. So with Ellington hurt, with a lot of that explosiveness gone, South Alabama probably can hang around in this game. My line is 11.5, but what I like in this game more, the under 55.5. It's gone down from 56.5 to 55.5, but with Ellington far less than 100%, with a South Alabama offense that is just not impressive at all whatsoever here on the season. They're 117th in yards per play on the offensive side. They're just not a good offensive team, but the defense generally steps up and plays pretty well. I think under 55.5, definitely the way to look there in that South Alabama-Georgia State game. And keep in mind here, too, that depending on how long Ellington's going to try to stick this thing out, it's definitely in Georgia State's best interest to play a little bit slower, not give him as much wear and tear. I think this is a slower-paced game here, too. So under 55.5, game 155-156, probably my favorite total of the week there between South Alabama and Georgia State. Boston College getting 20 against Notre Dame. This line's a little bit too high now, I think. I know Notre Dame played very well against Navy last week. Boston College is a decent football team. They run the ball. They move the chains. They play keep away pretty well. My number on the game is 19, so I'm right there where it opened. If we see a 21 in this game, may take a piece of Boston College here because, again, you're talking about a total 63.5, a little bit higher scoring than you would expect for a Boston College game. But, I'm not impressed with the explosive capabilities of Notre Dame's offense. They don't have a lot of really big plays. Boston College runs the football a lot. I'm actually surprised to see this total up as high as it is for game 161-162. Cal and Stanford here. You got Stanford a 2.5-point favorite. Interesting results for both of these teams last time out. Cal getting blown out, something we have not seen a whole lot here over the course of the season. They need a win to get to a bowl game. They've got this week, then at UCLA to try and get there. USC threw the football all over them. Stanford blown out by a Washington State team that, week in and week out, I don't know what we're going to get from the Cougars, but Stanford was clearly not ready for that one. They get a respite here in that Cal's offense is not particularly good, but I wonder about the mindset of the Stanford Cardinal here, because you've got this game, then you're hosting Notre Dame. They're probably not going to a bowl game. Will David Shaw be able to get his team up for this one? I don't know if that's going to be the case. And for Cal, you don't want to go into that last week in that game against UCLA needing a win. You don't want to have your back up against the wall going out on the road. I like Cal this week. My power rating on the game does actually have Stanford minus 3.5, but I think Cal, with the situation, with how good their defense has been playing most of the year and really the last several years, I don't see Stanford having a lot of success here. I don't know if either offense has a lot of success, but I think Cal just wins those ugly games more frequently than Stanford does. So I think the Golden Bears are the side there in that particular matchup. Oregon State, Washington State. Washington State, 10.5-point favorite here, down from 12.5, excuse me. Oregon State, look, you give them a lot of credit. They're 5-5 as well. They're playing for a bowl game. They got to try to get it this week because it'll be very tough for them to beat Oregon next week. Washington State can also get bowl eligible here in this one. I don't know what I'm going to get from Washington State week in and week out. I know what I'm going to get from Oregon State. It's a mediocre defense, a pretty decent offense. They're going to play hard. I don't know if Washington State's going to play hard week in and week out. Maybe you've got that leaking into the market a little bit here with this line coming down a couple of points. I think Oregon State probably the side that I prefer in the game, but I don't think I'm going to get too involved in this one. My line was right on the opener of 12.5. So no power ratings value. And I don't really know if there's any sort of situational or motivational edge to be had in that game either. We jump down quite a ways here on the board to Houston and Tulsa. Game 193, 194. Tulsa a 3-point favorite, so 2.5 still sitting out there in the market. Total on this game of 58.5, down from 60. Again, Houston's been trying really hard throughout the course of the season. I give them credit. I give Dana Holgorsen credit for not allowing this team to just roll over. Neither one of these teams with any bowl aspirations. But for Tulsa here, I've got to be worried about this team. They've played a lot of close games. They played very close with SMU. They played close with Cincinnati from a box score standpoint. Nearly beat Memphis. Played very well against Tulane. Finally got that win over Central Florida. And the bye week came at a very good time for them, so at least there's that. They didn't get the chance to bask in the glory of that win over UCF. But you've got to wonder here, how much is left in the tank for this Tulsa team? Because they've played a lot of close and emotional games. How much do they have left in that gas tank? Is this the big spot for them? If it is, I'd look to fade Tulsa next week when they go out on the road and take on East Carolina. So I think that's what you look for here. I don't think you play this game necessarily, but if Tulsa steps up, plays a big game, comes away with the win, I fade them next week against East Carolina, where I think Mike Houston's team definitely does show up. So, again, even though you may not have a play on the game for that week, you could set yourself up for something in the following weeks. Game 199-200, San Jose State and UNLV. San Jose State a big favorite here in this one of 7. Total on this game, 65.5, gone up a little bit from 62.5. UNLV is a dead man walking. This is a team that has not played particularly well over the course of the season. Tony Sanchez is probably going to be let go. I would be surprised if he's not. San Jose State, meanwhile, needs 2 wins to go to a bowl game. And what an accomplishment that would be for Brent Brennan and this program. Got to beat UNLV first. Then you get Fresno State at home the following week in a big-time night game. I like San Jose State here. Yeah, it's a big number, an uncomfortable number to lay on the road with a team that's rarely in a road favorite role, but it's got to be them. UNLV, I think they're done for the season. I think they've packed it away here. There's just not a whole lot left for that team. And also, too, next week, the rivalry game against Nevada. That's the game that they're more focused on, I would say. I think San Jose State is a decent look here this week, despite laying that pretty uncomfortable number on the road. Game 205-206, Coastal Carolina at Louisiana-Monroe. Monroe, 5.5-point favorite here in this one. I can't trust either one of these teams. I haven't been able to most of the season. I've tried a couple times with Monroe. It hasn't worked out. My line on this game is a little bit lower. It is Monroe -4. So maybe in that respect, Coastal Carolina has a touch of value, but also Pinnacle and Bookmaker both up to 6 on this game. So it gives you an indicator of where the sharp side is for this one. I'm not going to go up against that. I'd have to look at passing on that game. One more game to take a look at here. Penn State and Ohio State. We touched on this game a little bit earlier on in the week. Ohio State, 18.5-point favorite in this one. And look, Ohio State has had problems with Penn State. But this Ohio State team is the most polished I have ever seen. Penn State is an okay team. They're a good team. I don't think they're a top 10 caliber team in the eyes of most people. Yes, they're up there in my power ratings at 10. That's largely to stay in line with the market and where the market has this team rated. I think one of two things happens here. Ohio State has it in their minds that they struggle with Penn State and they look ahead to Michigan and they don't cover the number. The other option is Ohio State blows Penn State out like they've blown out everybody else here so far this season. Penn State is not fast enough on defense. I don't think their offense is explosive enough to keep up with Ohio State. You get Chase Young back for the Buckeyes, too. The Buckeyes should be fully motivated in this game. That's why I would lean to the Ohio State side. I'm not going to play the game, but I think Ohio State, a fully motivated Ohio State team, stands out here over Penn State. So, a lot of considerations for this week. It's not a great week from a marquee matchup standpoint, but a lot of handicapping angles for you to consider across the college football landscape, and we'll have a ton of them to talk about on next week's shows as well.